I still remember the taste of that tea. Sweet, earthy, with a strange after-smell I couldn't name. I smiled that day, sitting on the edge of my old wooden bench under the cherry tree, the one that bloomed pink every spring. My best friend Margaret had just brought me a cup of her special herbal blend. She said it would help me sleep better, calm my nerves. After all, she knew I'd been restless since Henry's death. 47 years of marriage, and when he was gone, my nights became long, echoing tunnels of memory and regret. Margaret had been my neighbour for nearly 3 decades, the kind of woman who always appeared at your door just when you needed company. She'd show up with a casserole when my son moved abroad. She sat beside me when my roses wilted one summer, and I cried like a child. We shared secrets over tea, talked about our youth, our husbands, our aches and dreams. I used to tell everyone, Margaret is the sister God forgot to give me. But that day, as I sipped the tea she'd brewed, something inside me stirred. Not physically, not yet. It was an instinct. A heaviness that hung behind her eyes. She watched me drink too closely. Her smile was too still. I brushed it off, of course. Age makes you suspicious of your own imagination. I told myself she was just worried about me. She'd been helping me with the garden lately, my pride, my life's work. Every inch of soil on that land carried a story. Henry and I built it together from nothing when we first bought this cottage after our marriage. He laid the wooden borders for the flower beds, and I planted every rose, every tulip, every herb by hand. After he died, tending that garden became my purpose. People in town would stop by just to see it. Local newspapers wrote about it once. The Widow's Garden of Hope. But something changed when Margaret started taking an interest. She began coming every morning with her gloves and tools, saying she just wanted to help. I was grateful at first. But soon she started rearranging things without asking, moving my daisies to another corner, replanting my lavender bushes, even cutting the old oak vine Henry had wrapped around the fence for our anniversary. When I protested, she'd laugh and say, "Oh, darling, don't be so sentimental. I'm only helping you modernize it." Modernize. As if my memories needed pruning. A week after that strange tea, I fell sick. It started as a fever. I assumed it was the flu. Then came the dizziness, the nausea, the tremors. My doctor couldn't find the cause. "Probably stress," he said. "You're overworking in that garden." Margaret took full charge then. She insisted on making my meals, said I should rest, let her handle everything. I trusted her completely. She had my house keys, my bank errands, everything. When my condition worsened, she stayed overnight, sleeping on my couch, whispering how she'd take care of me like a sister. But sometimes, I'd wake in the middle of the night and find her standing by the window, staring out at my garden in the moonlight. Her expression wasn't tender. It was hungry. I remember asking her one morning, "What are you thinking when you stare out there so long?" She smiled faintly and said, "I'm thinking how peaceful it would be to own something so perfect." Own. That word stayed with me. One afternoon when I was too weak to stand, she went outside to trim the tulips. I heard voices. Her voice, cheerful, almost giddy, talking to someone by the fence. I dragged myself to the window and peeked out. There she was, chatting with a man in a real estate suit. They were pointing at my garden. She even gestured toward the house. My heart thudded so hard I thought it might burst. When she came back in, I asked who that was. She didn't flinch. "Oh, just a friend helping me find a landscaper," she said casually. But the way she avoided my eyes, I knew she was lying. That night, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and dread. Why would she be talking to a real estate agent? Why did she need landscapers on my property? Then, as I went to the kitchen to get water, I noticed something odd. The bottle of herbal extract she'd been adding to my tea was missing. I checked the bin. Empty. No label, just a faint chemical smell. The next morning, when she came by with another fresh cup, I refused it. She looked startled, but not guilty. She only smiled tighter and said, "You don't trust me anymore, do you?" I didn't answer. My voice was gone. Over the next few days, my strength slowly returned. Perhaps because I stopped taking her tea. Perhaps because I began eating only what I cooked. And when she realized I was regaining my energy, something dark flashed in her eyes, like a shadow flickering through sunlight. That's when she stopped pretending. One evening, as I was watering my roses, she came over, no longer with that warm, neighbourly smile. Her tone was cold, firm. "You know, Clara," she said, "you've done well with this place, but maybe it's time you let it go." I laughed nervously. "Let it go? It's my life, Margaret." She stepped closer. "You can't tend to it forever. You're frail. You could die in your sleep one of these days. Wouldn't you rather this garden live on under someone who can take care of it?" I froze. There it was, her real intent. I felt it in my bones. "Are you saying you want it?" I whispered. She smiled again, but this time it was hollow. "Let's just say, if you ever needed someone to inherit it, I'd make sure it thrives." The way she said inherit chilled me. She wasn't talking about the garden anymore. She was talking about everything. That night, I wrote a note, just in case. I placed it under the floorboard by Henry's photograph. My handwriting trembled, but the words were clear. "If anything happens to me, it wasn't natural. Check Margaret." And that was the last night I ever truly slept in peace. I woke to birdsong and a brittle silence. The kind of silence that makes you listen harder because you suspect it's hiding something. The note I'd written and tucked beneath Henry's photograph felt like a pebble in my shoe all morning, a small, hard truth I could not ignore. I held my tea kettle under the tap, then stopped myself. No tea today. No tea until I understood what Margaret was doing to me. I poured water into a plain glass instead, holding it like a talisman as I looked out at the garden. It was a soft morning, the kind with a silver sky and damp air that makes roses glisten like they're about to confess. My roses looked back at me, obedient, faithful. A line of ants spirited themselves along the flagstones, minding their work. I've always loved watching small, honest things. They never pretend to be anything else. I put on Henry's old cardigan, still smelling faintly of lavender and engine oil, and shuffled toward the back door. I moved slowly on purpose. People underestimate you when you move slow, and I wanted Margaret to underestimate me. The door clicked open and my garden breathed around me, an old friend relieved I'd come outside. The gate latch scraped softly. I turned my head and there she was, punctual as sunrise, carrying her tote bag and a smile that no longer fooled me. "Morning, darling," she sang. "I thought we could thin the mint before it takes over." "I'm feeling a bit better," I said, letting the words wander out casually, like I wasn't watching her eyes. They flickered, just once. "Wonderful," she replied. "Then let me mix you something gentle. Chamomile, fennel." "I'll pass," I said, dropping my gaze to a clump of dandelions. "I'm weaning myself off herbs for a while. Doctor's orders." That was a lie, but it tasted right. I kept my hands busy, plucking a yellowed leaf, smoothing damp soil with my fingers. I could feel her impatience prickling against my shoulder blades. It wasn't the garden she loved, not the way I did. She loved the idea of it, the power of owning it, possessing it. The garden had always been my cathedral. To her, it was a crown. "Have you thought any more about what we discussed?" she asked after a time, her shadow falling long across my lilies. "What did we discuss?" I asked, playing dumb as I traced the line of a copper irrigation pipe Henry had installed years ago, marvelling at how his hands were still everywhere. "About the future," she said, lowering her voice, putting a softness in it that made me want to scrub the word with soap. "About making arrangements. I hate to see you so tired. If something happened, the garden might—" "Die?" I finished, finally looking up. "You think my garden would die?" "I think it would be neglected," she said, and let the word land between us. She was not used to being refused. I could tell by the stiffness in her jaw, the faint throb at her temple. She'd always hidden her ambition well, but it was starting to leak through the seams. I fingered the small locket at my throat. Inside it, a lock of Henry's hair and a tiny pressed petal from the first rose we coaxed to bloom the year we moved in. "Funny," I said, attempting a lightness I didn't feel. "I had a visitor yesterday." Her eyes sharpened. "Oh?" "The postman." I let the pause stretch. "He said a gentleman in a nice suit was asking about my property lines last week. You know anything about that?" She blinked, then smiled with too many teeth. "Clara, you know how men are. Probably got lost. The road markers around here are a mess." "The postman isn't a man who gets lost," I said. "He's delivered to me for 15 years. Her mouth shut. A small wind slipped through the cherry tree, lifting a whisper of blossoms that weren't due yet, and the lie hung in the air like stale perfume. I didn't say anything else. I let her rake and clip and pretend we were fine. But when she went inside to freshen up, I went to the fence where I'd seen her with the man. The soil there was disturbed, not by feet, but by the corner of a briefcase or a box. I know the garden's every sigh. This was a new one. I crouched slowly and found a scrap of paper half buried, wrinkled, damp, the ink feathered. I teased it loose. The fragment had a header, "Preliminary Valuation," and below it, my address. The number was smudged, but the word "High" was legible where "Market Demand" sat beside it like a greedy little shadow. My pulse ticked. I slid the scrap into my cardigan pocket and stood, swaying with a dizziness that could have been illness or rage. I told myself to breathe, to think like Henry told me when bad news came. "Slow, Clara, slow. We fix what we can reach." Margaret emerged from my kitchen, chewing on the inside of her cheek. "I'll make lunch. You rest." I let her. I wanted to see what she'd do when my back was turned. I went to the parlour and sat facing the hallway mirror, positioned so I could see the reflection of my kitchen's doorway. She set bread and soup on a tray, but before carrying it out, she paused and pulled a small dropper bottle from her tote. So quick. One drop, stir, the spoon tapping twice. I closed my eyes. When she brought the tray to me, I lifted the bowl gratefully and, as I bowed my head, I let the soup slip, deliberately, down my blouse. "Oh dear," she clucked, lunging for napkins. "Your hands!" "Clumsy old me," I chirped, patting my chest. "I'll change. You take this back and I'll be right along." She hesitated, then left with the tray. I stepped into the hallway, slid soundlessly to the kitchen doorway, and watched her dump my soup into the sink and ladle another serving from the pot, fresh, untainted, glancing over her shoulder as if the walls had eyes. And the walls did. Mine. I went to the bedroom, pulled off my blouse, and with my free hand reached beneath Henry's photograph. The note was still there. I laid my palm over it and felt calm bloom beneath my skin, a small white flower of courage. In the afternoon, while she weeded the far bed, I telephoned Dr. Whitaker. I told him I needed a test. "For what?" he asked, kindly bored. "For whatever someone might slip in a widow's tea," I said, and startled at the steadiness of my voice. He grew cautious. "You think you've been poisoned?" "I think I've been made tired," I said, in a way that's very convenient for someone else. He asked me to come in the next morning, fasting. I said I would. When I hung up, I found her watching me through the kitchen pass-through. She had that hunger in her eyes again, the one that sang ownership. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Just routine blood work," I said. "I'm old, we leak." The evening brought rain, a soft hush falling over the roof. I sat awake with my knitting, listening to the house settle around me, counting stitches like counting breaths. At midnight, I heard the back door ease open. Margaret's footsteps were threads across the linoleum. She wasn't quiet enough. People who have lived long in the same space learn the grammar of its sounds. I gave it 10 minutes, then crept after her. She was outside, kneeling by the rosemary bush, umbrella propped against her shoulder, flashlight held low. And she wasn't pruning. She was digging near the stone marker where Henry and I had buried our old dog, Pippin. I watched her lift a metal tin from the earth, unscrew the lid and count something, papers, before tucking it back and replacing the soil carefully, careful as a thief. I stepped back into shadow, shook so hard my teeth tapped, then slid back inside and locked the door. I sat at the little kitchen table and waited till dawn, palms flat against the wood, mind pulsing with one thought: I need a witness. At sunrise, I telephoned a boy from up the lane, Evan, whose mother I'd watched grow from pigtails to mortgages. He does odd jobs, knows his way around wires and cameras the way I know the seasons. I told him I needed help with a wildcat in the garden. He laughed. "Mrs. H, we don't have wildcats." "We do when they wear cardigans," I said, and he must have heard the iron in it because he promised to come by discreetly after school. At the clinic, Dr. Whittaker drew my blood and didn't make small talk. He asked me what I suspected. I told him about the teas and meals and my symptoms. He wrote the word alkaloids on a pad, and digitalis, and aconite, and the room felt colder. "If someone's using plant-based toxins, it can mimic a lot," he said. "We'll screen broadly." "Can you test my leftovers?" I asked, and slid a small jar from my purse, the cloth I'd used to dab the soup. He frowned, then nodded. "We can try," he said. When I left, he put a hand on my shoulder and said, "You did right to come." I returned home to find Margaret on my porch, arms folded, the smile gone. "Where were you?" she asked. Not, "How are you?" Not, "Did you sleep?" Just that. Where? As if she misplaced me. "Church," I said, lying again, and felt the odd exhilaration of reclaiming my own story. Her nostrils flared, then smoothed. "Well, I made stew," she said. "Come eat while it's hot." "I'll have some later," I replied. "I'm not hungry right now." She studied me the way one studies a locked door, measuring hinges. "You're being difficult." "I'm being alive," I said quietly. She left in a huff that afternoon, claiming errands. I walked straight to the rosemary bush with my old garden trowel and dug where she had dug. The tin was there, wrapped in oilcloth to resist rain. I lifted it and carried it inside before opening it. My hands shook, but they knew how to do this, the gentle lifting, the patience of gardeners and widows. Inside were photocopies of documents, neatly folded. My deed, my will. A typed letter of intent naming a caretaker beneficiary in the event of my sudden incapacity. My name forged in a careful imitation of my script. There were also business cards, the real estate agents, a lawyer's, and a paper with a list of weekend dates and the word "showings" scribbled next to them. I tasted metal in my mouth. At the bottom of the tin, a small amber dropper bottle with a handwritten label that read, "Sleep." I closed my eyes. A sound escaped me, half sob, half animal. I wanted Henry. I wanted my son. I wanted to be 20 and racing barefoot through the rows. But I also wanted to fight. I placed everything back except the bottle, which I tucked into my pocket and replaced with an identical empty one from my spice drawer. I reburied the tin exactly where it had been, smoothing the soil with my palm, whispering to Pippin's long-gone bones, "Good boy. Guard." At 4 o'clock, a soft knock. Evan. Baseball cap, polite eyes. I let him in through the side gate. "Show me where," he said, already unzipping his backpack. I pointed to the kitchen, the hallway, the back door. "Motion sensors?" he asked. "Discreet," I said. "I don't want her to know she's being watched, not yet." He worked quickly, fingers nimble. We set a small camera above the pantry door, another tucked into the crown of the old ceramic rooster on the shelf, and one outside under the eave facing the rosemary and the fence. He synced them to an app on a tablet he left with me. "You'll get alerts," he said, "and it records." "How much do I owe you?" I asked. He shrugged. "You'll pay me with stories," he said, smiling, and for a moment my chest ached with joy so sharp it might as well have been youth. When Margaret returned, just past dusk, I was sitting with my knitting again. She tried the back door. It was locked. She used her spare key and came in, looking around like a queen returning to a room that had dared rearrange itself. "You locked me out," she said. "It's my house," I replied, meeting her gaze in the mirror. The cameras watched, the garden listened, and in my pocket the amber bottle burned like a tiny sun. I was no longer a woman who needed saving. I was a woman with proof blooming in the dark. That night, the tablet chirped, motion at the back door. I lifted it with hands that did not tremble anymore and pressed play. The image came into focus. Margaret's silhouette at my kitchen sink, pouring from her tote into a teapot, stirring, pausing, then taking a small sip herself and spitting it into the sink, grimacing. She wiped the rim with her sleeve and set the pot on the counter, then placed a folded paper on top. I paused the video, zoomed in. Even blurred, I knew my own name when I saw it, curving across the page in a hand that almost matched mine. I pressed my lips together until they hurt, then smiled so slowly it felt like sunrise. She had given me everything I needed. All I had to do now was keep breathing and wait. I hardly slept that night. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind against the window sounded like footsteps. I sat there in the dim glow of the tablet, replaying that clip again and again. Margaret, my so-called friend, standing in my kitchen, poisoning me while wearing the same calm smile she used when she brought me pies. The betrayal was so complete it made my skin prickle. By morning, the sun had barely cleared the horizon, and I already knew what I had to do. I called Dr. Whitaker's office. "Doctor," I said, trying to sound casual, "if my results come in, could you ring me directly? Not through my neighbour, just me." He hesitated, then said softly, "We'll handle it carefully, Mrs. Harris." Carefully. That word told me he understood. I put on a thick shawl, stepped outside, and walked through my garden. Every flower looked different now. The tulips she'd trimmed felt violated, the soil she'd touched cold. I crouched by Henry's favourite marigolds, my breath fogging in the early chill. "She tried to take it all," I whispered, "but I won't let her." I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to sell. I'd stay and fight, just like Henry would have done. At 9:10, I saw her car pull up. She walked up the path carrying another tray of food, wearing that same pastel cardigan and her favourite pearl earrings, her costume of innocence. "Morning, Clara," she sang too brightly. "You didn't answer my call." "I was resting," I said. She glanced toward the kitchen window. "You haven't eaten yet, have you? I made stew again." My stomach turned. "You shouldn't have," I said, keeping my voice even. "I insist. You need strength." She brushed past me like she owned the place. I followed her inside, careful not to show what I'd seen the night before. The cameras were still rolling, quietly watching every gesture. She moved around my kitchen with a practiced familiarity that made my teeth grind. She ladled soup into a bowl, humming under her breath. I caught the scent, earthy, faintly metallic. She set the bowl down in front of me, then placed a folded paper beside it. "Oh, before I forget, I wrote something up for you, just in case." I stared at it. The title at the top read, "Temporary Transfer of Property and Care." My pulse quickened. "I found a way to make things easier for you," she continued sweetly. "You sign this and I'll handle maintenance, taxes, and everything. That way, if your health gets worse, you won't have to worry. I can protect your legacy." I wanted to laugh. Protect my legacy. She wanted to erase it. "You think I'm dying?" I asked quietly. Her eyes flicked up, just for a second, startled, then soft again. "Clara, we're all dying. But you're tired. You've been so sick." "I'm better now," I said, cutting her off. The silence that followed was heavy. She tilted her head. "You don't trust me anymore, do you?" I smiled faintly. "Would you, if our positions were reversed?" For a heartbeat, I saw it. The truth behind her eyes. Cold, calculating greed. Then it vanished behind that mask of sympathy again. "You're imagining things, dear." I leaned forward, fingers trembling but voice steady. "Am I?" The front door creaked then. Evan. I told him to drop by around this time, pretending to check my gutters. The moment Margaret heard his voice, her expression changed. Tense, defensive. "Who's that?" she asked sharply. "Just a helper," I said. "Someone young, someone who sees everything clearly." Her lips tightened. She glanced at the paper again. "Think about it, Clara. I only want what's best for you." I picked up the paper, folded it neatly, and smiled. "I'll think about it," I said. "You'll have my answer soon." She seemed satisfied with that. She left the bowl untouched, walked out the back door, and disappeared down the lane. I stood still for a long moment after she was gone, then poured the soup into a jar, sealed it, and labelled it in block letters, "Evidence." That afternoon, Dr. Whittaker called. His voice was grim. "Mrs. Harris, we found traces of aconitine in your blood. It's a toxin from monkshood, a flower sometimes used in herbal mixtures. It can cause the exact symptoms you described." I closed my eyes. The garden blurred before me. Monkshood. She planted some herself last month, saying the purple blooms would add colour to the border. I hadn't thought anything of it. "Are you safe right now?" he asked. "Yes," I whispered. "I'm safe. For now." After I hung up, I called the police. I told them everything. The tea, the symptoms, the footage. The officer, a woman named Detective Lang, said she'd be there within the hour. But before she could arrive, I heard the crunch of tyres again. I looked out and saw Margaret's car pulling up fast. Too fast. Something in my chest locked. I hid the jar and the tablet under the sofa cushion and moved toward the window. She was clutching her handbag tight, eyes darting around like she was being chased by her own guilt. She burst in without knocking. "Clara, we need to talk." "What is it now?" Her voice trembled, but not with fear, with desperation. "That doctor called me. He said you'd gone behind my back. You told him lies about me." I felt my blood run cold. "He shouldn't have called you," I said slowly. "That's confidential." She stepped closer. "You've always trusted me. I've done everything for you. And this is how you repay me?" "Everything," I repeated, laughing bitterly. "You tried to kill me, Margaret." Her face twisted. "I was helping you rest. You were miserable, wasting away in this house with your ghosts." I took a step back. "So you thought you'd hurry the process along?" She lunged forward suddenly, grabbing my arm. "You don't understand. You don't deserve this place. You let it rot with your sadness. I could have made it beautiful again. I could have made it mine." Her confession came like a thunderclap. I felt a surge of strength I didn't know I had. I shoved her off, hard. She stumbled, hitting the edge of the counter. A pot clattered to the floor. She looked at me, wild-eyed. You think they'll believe you over me? You're old, Clara. Senile. You've been ill. I smiled, my heart pounding like war drums. They'll believe the footage. Her mouth fell open. What? The cameras, I said softly. They've seen everything. A silence fell so deep it felt holy. Then, faintly, outside, the sound of approaching sirens. Her face drained of colour. You called them. I didn't answer. She turned toward the door like a cornered animal, but before she could flee, 2 police cars pulled up, red and blue lights flashing through the windows like shards of justice. Detective Lang stepped inside, calm but firm. Mrs. Margaret O'Neill, she said, we need to ask you a few questions. Margaret's gaze darted toward me, hatred, disbelief, and something else. Fear. You ruined everything, she hissed. I stood tall, my hand resting on the back of Henry's old chair. No, I said quietly. You did. They led her away in handcuffs. She didn't struggle. She just kept looking at me like she still couldn't believe the old fool next door had outsmarted her. When the door closed behind them, the house felt both emptier and heavier. I sank into my chair, shaking. My garden shimmered through the window, rain-kissed and alive, whispering secrets only I could hear. I thought of Henry, of how he used to say, "The earth remembers who tends it, Clara." And now it remembered me. The house didn't feel like home that night. It felt like an echo chamber of everything that had happened. The flashing lights had faded, the sirens were gone, but their ghostly reflections still danced on the walls of my memory. I sat in Henry's old armchair, the same one where he used to read his newspapers every morning, clutching the blanket I'd knitted during our first winter here. The air smelled faintly of chamomile and guilt. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't afraid to close my eyes. But sleep didn't come easily. Every time I drifted, I saw Margaret's face, her eyes wide when I said cameras, her lips trembling with disbelief. I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. The kind of emptiness that comes after a storm, when you realise everything standing might never feel quite the same again. At dawn, Detective Lang came back with a notepad and a voice that was both gentle and grave. She thanked me for my cooperation, then asked if I could show her where the evidence was, my recordings, the jar, the papers. I led her to everything, the tin from the garden, the footage, even the soup-stained cloth from that cursed bowl. She looked through each thing carefully, making small notes. "You did well, Mrs. Harris," she said. "Most people wouldn't have been this alert. It probably saved your life." I smiled faintly. Age teaches you patience, and the art of pretending you're weaker than you are. She chuckled softly, but there was something unreadable in her eyes. "You said you've known her 30 years?" "Yes," I whispered. "She was here when Henry died. She helped me bury Pippin. She watered my plants when my arthritis flared up. She was the last person I ever thought would hurt me." Detective Lang sighed, flipping a page in her notebook. "We found something interesting when we ran her background," she said slowly. "It appears Margaret O'Neill isn't her real name." I looked up sharply. "What?" "She changed her name 15 years ago. Before that, she went by Margaret Hale. She was married to a man named Charles Hale, a horticulturist who died in a greenhouse fire." I felt my blood run cold. "A horticulturist?" Lang nodded. "He had a reputation for collecting rare botanical toxins. Some of the same compounds we found in your blood were traced to plants grown in his old lab. The case was never closed. Police believed foul play, but there wasn't enough evidence. Margaret was the only witness." I pressed a trembling hand to my mouth. The memory of her saying, "I could have made it beautiful again," echoed in my head like a curse. "So she's done this before?" "It's possible," Lang said, "and she almost got away with it again." I didn't know whether to cry or scream. My friend, my companion, the woman I'd trusted with the key to my life, had built her existence on someone else's death before mine. Over the next few days, the small town of Birchwood buzzed with whispers. They called her the Garden Widow. Every shopkeeper, every neighbour came by with casseroles and sympathetic eyes. But sympathy didn't touch me anymore. I wasn't a victim. I was a survivor who had stared betrayal in the face and lived to tell it. Then came the trial. It was held in the county courthouse, a place that smelled of varnished wood and paper ghosts. Margaret sat at the defendant's table in a plain blue dress, hair neatly pinned, eyes calm and unrepentant. The poison test results, the video evidence, and her forged paperwork were presented piece by piece. Every time her lawyer tried to suggest I was confused or delusional, the footage played on the courtroom screen, her pouring, stirring, and wiping the cup clean. Her face expressionless, methodical. She didn't flinch, not once. When I took the stand, my hands shook, but my voice did not. She wasn't just after a garden, I said to the jury. She was after everything that grew from it, my peace, my history, my home. Her lawyer objected to my emotional dramatics. The judge overruled it. The truth was emotion. The truth hurt. Then, halfway through the proceedings, something unexpected happened. A man stood up from the back of the courtroom, thin, pale, with eyes so familiar it made me pause. "Your Honour," he said, "I have information." The judge frowned, but allowed it. The man introduced himself as Paul Hale, Margaret's stepson. "She did the same thing to my father," he said. "She poisoned him slowly, just like she did to Mrs. Harris. She told the police it was an accident, that he mixed up his herbs, but she took his research, his land, and sold it months later." The courtroom fell silent. Margaret finally looked shaken. "Why didn't you come forward before?" the prosecutor asked. He looked at me, then back at her. "Because she threatened to ruin my life if I did. But when I read the paper about another widow getting sick, I knew it was her again." I remember the look on her face then, cold realization that her carefully tended lie was collapsing. For the first time in years, I saw fear in her eyes. The jury didn't take long. Guilty on all counts, attempted murder, forgery, fraud. When the verdict was read, she turned her gaze toward me. Not angry, not pleading, just empty, as if she couldn't understand how the story ended without her winning. She was sentenced to 20 years. The papers called it the Garden Betrayal. Reporters wanted interviews. I refused them all. I didn't want fame. I wanted peace. The kind of peace that can only grow again from the soil of pain. Weeks later, when everything was quiet again, I went out to the garden. The cherry tree was in bloom, soft petals drifting down like whispers of forgiveness. I took the last bit of the monkshood she'd planted and uprooted it myself. The roots came out, easily, almost willingly, like the earth itself was done keeping her secrets. I buried the empty dropper bottle beside it, deep where no one would find it again. For a moment I stood there and felt the wind against my face. Henry's voice came to me then, not as memory, but as presence. "You've done enough, Clara. Let the garden heal." I smiled through tears. "I will," I whispered. "I promise." As I turned to go back inside, something caught my eye. A folded envelope lodged under the garden bench. I bent down and picked it up. It was damp and faded, but my name was written on it in a shaky hand. Clara. I opened it slowly, expecting an old note of mine blown loose by the wind. But inside, in Margaret's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "You were supposed to understand. We could have shared it. Your garden, your peace. I just wanted what you had. I just wanted to feel alive again." My hands trembled. For all her cruelty, that sentence hit me like a stone. She hadn't wanted the flowers. She wanted my life. The feeling of being loved, admired, remembered. Something she'd lost long before she ever stepped into my world. I folded the note carefully, tucked it into my apron pocket, and whispered to the wind. Then maybe we both got what we deserved. That night, I sat by the window as the moon bathed my garden in silver light. The wounds were still fresh, but the air felt different, lighter, honest. The house creaked softly, not from fear, but from old age. Like me. For the first time in a long time, I brewed myself a cup of tea. Real tea. No herbs, no fear, just warmth. As I took the first sip, I looked out at the garden and smiled. The garden didn't belong to Margaret, or even to me anymore. It belonged to the memories that survived both love and betrayal. It was proof that even poisoned soil could bloom again, if you dared to replant. It was 2 weeks after the sentencing when the letter came. Not from Margaret, not directly. It was official, stamped and sealed in the heavy beige of prison correspondence. I almost didn't open it. I'd promised myself I wouldn't let her voice live in my house again. But there's a certain pull that comes with unfinished business, a curiosity that tugs like a loose thread. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one she used to poison me, and tore it open. The first line made my breath catch. You think you won, Clara, but there are things you don't know about your precious garden. My fingers went cold. I read on. I didn't just want your life. I already had a piece of it. Years ago, long before Henry died, he and I met. He used to come to my greenhouse to buy seeds. He told you they were from the catalogue, didn't he? He lied. I was there before you ever knew. I froze. My heart thudded against my ribs. No, Henry would never. He couldn't. We shared more than plants, Clara. He used to say you reminded him of the roses. Beautiful, but too careful, too safe. I was the wildflower he could never have. So I kept a part of him, a seed of what we grew. It's still in your soil, if you know where to look. The letter ended there. No signature, just that venomous trail of words curling through my mind. I pushed my chair back, trembling. For a long time I stared at the wall clock, watching its pendulum swing like it was counting my disbelief. Margaret was a liar, a manipulator, a murderer. But what if this was her final revenge? To make me doubt the one man who had been my whole life? I couldn't let that thought sit. So I did what I always did when life became unbearable. I went to the garden. The evening light had softened to gold, and the cherry blossoms were falling like old memories. I walked the path barefoot, feeling the cool soil beneath my toes, letting the earth calm me. Henry's touch was everywhere here. The trellises he built, the bench he carved our initials into, the old lantern by the rosemary bush. It was impossible to believe that any part of this place belonged to her. But her words itched in my mind. It's still in your soil. I knelt near the western edge of the garden, the spot where Henry and I had once buried a time capsule, years before he died. It had always been our private secret. The earth there was darker, richer. I brushed the topsoil away with my hands and felt something, hard, metallic. My breath hitched. I dug deeper until a small tin box emerged, rusted and moss-covered. It wasn't the one Henry and I buried. That one had been larger, sealed with a red ribbon. This was different. I opened it carefully. Inside were brittle papers, old photographs, and a tiny cloth pouch tied with twine. The photos were of Henry, young, handsome, smiling that same half smile that used to melt me. But the background wasn't our garden. It was Margaret's old greenhouse. I recognized the stained glass windows, the ivy climbing the walls. My throat tightened. One photo showed Henry standing beside her. She looked younger too, radiant, alive. His arm was around her shoulder. Not possessive, familiar. I wanted to scream, but the sound got stuck somewhere deep in my chest. My Henry, my loyal, gentle Henry. Had he lied to me all those years? I opened the cloth pouch with shaking fingers. Inside was a small packet of seeds wrapped in wax paper. Written on the paper, in Henry's handwriting, were the words, "Wild hearts grow where they shouldn't." I sat there, frozen, as the garden seemed to hum around me. The wind whispered through the leaves, soft but relentless. I could almost hear his voice, warm, tender, guilty. "No," I whispered aloud, tears filling my eyes. "You didn't love her. You couldn't have." But deep down, part of me knew that maybe, once, before we'd grown old together, before sickness and mortgages and time dulled the edges of romance, maybe he had. Maybe that's why she fixated on me, why she wanted my garden, why she wanted to reclaim what she thought was hers. I sat until the moon rose, the tin beside me, the letter burning in my pocket. My anger slowly softened into something I didn't expect. Pity. Pity for both of them, for whatever brokenness had turned love into obsession. The next morning I went to town. I found Detective Lang at the station and handed her the letter and the tin. "You'll want to read these," I said quietly. She skimmed the letter, frowning. "She's still trying to control you, Mrs. Harris. Don't give her that satisfaction." "She mentioned Henry," I said, my voice small. "And seeds." Lang's eyes softened. "Even if parts of it are true, that doesn't erase what she did. It doesn't make her right." "I know," I said, "but I need to know for myself." She nodded, promising to have the items examined. "If there's anything dangerous, poisonous seeds, toxins, we'll dispose of them safely." That night, I dreamed of Henry. He was younger again, standing at the edge of the garden, smiling at me with that gentle patience that had once made me fall in love with him. But in the dream, the space beside him wasn't empty. Margaret was there too, her eyes soft and sad. They both looked at me, like two ghosts finally asking to be forgiven. When I woke, I couldn't cry. I couldn't rage. I just breathed. A week later, Detective Lang returned. "We analysed the seeds," she said. "They're harmless. Decorative hybrids, some of them extinct now. Your husband might have bred them himself. He was a talented man." I let out a shaky breath. "So she lied?" Lang shrugged. "Or she told the truth in a way that still hurts." I thanked her and walked her out. When I returned to the garden, the world felt different again. Not ruined, not healed, just real. I took the wax paper with the seeds and pressed it between my palms. That evening, I planted them in a small circle near the cherry tree. Not because I wanted to remember Margaret or Henry's mistake, if it was one, but because every story, even the painful ones, deserves a place to rest. Days turned into weeks. I watered them every morning, not expecting anything. Then one dawn I saw it, tiny green shoots pushing through the soil, delicate but determined. I knelt beside them, smiling through tears. "You stubborn little things," I whispered. "You're just like us." As they grew, their petals came in unlike anything else in the garden. Soft lilac with veins of white, glowing faintly in the moonlight. It was as if something new had been born from everything that had died. I decided to name them peace lilies, though I knew they weren't really lilies. They were the last gift of a past that had both loved me and tried to destroy me. Now, every evening, I sit on the bench with my tea, watching those flowers sway in the wind. Sometimes I talk to them. Sometimes I talk to Henry. Sometimes, when the night is quiet enough, I even whisper a prayer for Margaret. Because some souls, no matter how poisoned, still came from the same soil. It's strange how peace doesn't come with silence. It comes with sound, the right kind of sound, the soft brush of wind through petals, the crackle of morning light across dew, the faint, steady hum of life continuing as if nothing ever broke. That's what my garden sounds like now. Not perfect, not quiet, just alive. Months have passed since Margaret's sentencing. The news stopped printing my name. The neighbours have gone back to their routines, though they still wave when they pass the fence, some out of sympathy, some out of curiosity. To them, I'm the woman who caught her best friend trying to kill her. I used to hate that title. Now I've learned to live with it, because it's not just about what someone did to me, it's about what I refuse to let her take. I spend most mornings at Henry's bench, the same one where everything started. The peace lilies have bloomed beautifully, tall, proud, defiant. Every time I look at them, I think of all the lives entangled in this soil. Mine, Henry's, Margaret's, even Paul's. The earth keeps all our secrets, but it also forgives. One morning, a letter came from Paul Hale, her stepson. It was short, written in a neat, careful hand. Mrs. Harris, I wanted to thank you. What you did gave me closure I thought I'd never have. My father's death always felt wrong, but no one believed me. You did. I hope your garden grows brighter now. Paul. I folded that letter gently and kept it in my apron pocket. Somehow it felt like the end of something heavy, like a book closing. But life, as I've learned, doesn't end with the last page. It drifts, reshapes, and grows in unexpected directions. A few weeks later, I was out trimming the rose bushes when a young woman walked up to the gate. Late 20s, maybe. Nervous, clutching a small bouquet of supermarket carnations. Mrs. Harris? She asked softly. I nodded. She smiled weakly. My name's Elise. I'm Margaret's niece. The name hit me like a small wind. I hadn't thought of Margaret in months, not really. Not beyond her shadow in the prison cell of memory. I didn't know whether to tell the girl to leave or to let her in. She asked me to come, Elise said quickly, seeing my hesitation. She wanted me to bring you this. She handed me a small envelope, edges worn, faintly scented with lavender. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper and one pressed lilac petal. Clara. The lilies bloomed, didn't they? I always knew they would. Maybe we both planted something we didn't understand. I won't ask for forgiveness, but I hope when you look at them, you think of something gentler than hate. M. I stared at the letter for a long time. Then I looked at Elise, who seemed almost ashamed. She told me to tell you. She remembers. The garden, Elise whispered. She said it was the only place she ever felt alive. Something broke quietly inside me, not in pain, but in release. I nodded slowly. Tell her, I said softly, that the garden remembers her too. Elise smiled through tears, then left, the gate clicking softly behind her. That night I couldn't sleep. The moonlight poured through my curtains, silvering the edges of everything. My teacup, the photos on the wall, Henry's old hat still hanging by the door. I got up and stepped outside. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of earth and blooming lilies. I walked to the edge of the garden and ran my fingers over their petals. They shimmered under the moon, luminous, alive. And for the first time since it all happened, I spoke to both of them, Henry and Margaret, together. You made a mess of love, I whispered, my voice shaking. But maybe love was all it ever was, just a messy, desperate need to be remembered. The wind rustled through the cherry tree as if answering me. I closed my eyes and let the memories come. Henry's laughter echoing across summer afternoons. Margaret's voice, sharp and warm, calling my name from across the fence. the way her eyes softened when she thought no one was looking. For all her cruelty, she wasn't born evil. She was made by loneliness, by envy, by something life denied her and she couldn't accept. And maybe I understood that now. I looked around at the garden, every inch of it shaped by love and loss. The soil carried every version of me, the young wife planting her first rose, the widow finding purpose again, the betrayed friend clutching her chest in disbelief, and now, the old woman standing tall among ghosts, finally at peace. People always say gardens are alive because of water and sunlight, but that's not true. Gardens live because someone believes they should. Every seed survives because someone loved it enough to wait. And I had waited. Through betrayal, through sickness, through the taste of poison and the weight of truth, I had waited for life to grow again. When dawn came, I brewed a pot of tea, the real kind, black and bitter and human. I carried my cup outside, sat on the bench, and watched the first light touch the lilies. The petals glowed like little hearts opening to the world. I smiled. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. I reached for my journal, the one Henry had given me decades ago, back when love was new and our hands were steady. I wrote slowly, carefully, each word shaped with the kind of patience you only learn after surviving everything you shouldn't have. My best friend poisoned me for my garden, but she couldn't kill what she never planted. The roots she tried to steal were never mine or hers. They belonged to life itself. And life has forgiven us both. I closed the book and looked toward the horizon. The morning light spilled across the petals like forgiveness itself, soft and endless. And for the first time since Henry's death, I whispered something I hadn't said aloud in years. Not to him, not to anyone. Thank you. Then I leaned back, the garden breathing around me, the world still spinning, the lilies swaying as though they knew the truth better than I ever could. Even poisoned soil can bloom again, if you just dare to plant something new. And I had.